As night falls over a city, the lights in corporate towers stay on. Inside, professionals are exchanging physical and intellectual exhaustion for a paycheck. Meanwhile, miles away, an investor is asleep, yet their net worth continues to climb. From an early age, most of us are handed a specific equation for success: secure a higher salary, put in longer hours, and climb the ranks. The assumption is that wealth is simply the inevitable byproduct of working harder. Yet the people grinding through the most intense 80-hour weeks, the ones sacrificing their health and time, are frequently the ones caught in a cycle of financial anxiety. The flaw in the equation is the exchange itself. A worker is trading a strictly finite, non-renewable resource, their time, for a medium of exchange that slowly loses its purchasing power to inflation. Escaping this cycle requires stepping off the corporate ladder altogether. It requires shifting focus from how fast you can climb to who actually owns the building the ladder leans against. The path most people follow is the public curriculum. It instructs you to get a secure job, stockpile cash in a savings account, and treat all debt as an absolute danger to be avoided. But the top 1% operate on an unwritten curriculum. Their financial decisions are governed by the speed at which capital moves, the strategic application of leverage, and the accumulation of equity. The public curriculum is a highly effective design feature of the modern economy. It produces a predictable, reliable, and heavily taxed workforce, which generates the exact labor and capital needed to sustain the systems owned by the upper class. Adhering strictly to the rules taught in school means playing the economic game on the highest possible difficulty setting, permanently capped by the hours in a day. The first mechanical step to operating on the unwritten curriculum is cognitive decoupling, the deliberate structural separation of a person's physical presence from the revenue they generate. Instead of selling physical labor by the hour, wealthy individuals build or acquire systems. A structured business or a piece of real estate manufactures value autonomously, whether the owner is awake, traveling, or focusing on another project. Historical industrialists recognized this early on. They noted that the vast majority of millionaires achieved their status by owning real estate and business assets, capturing exponential returns that wage labor could never produce. This chart compares both approaches over 4 decades. Saving $100,000 at 3% yields roughly $300,000. That same capital in cash-flowing real estate scales conservatively to $3 million. Ownership serves as the greatest force multiplier in capitalism. In any economic system, you are either accumulating ownership of the world or you are paying someone else who is. The mechanism of ownership also grants access to a completely different legal game. For the middle class, the cash flow sequence is linear. You earn an income, the government extracts taxes, and you survive on the net amount. The wealthy route their capital through an alternative framework, utilizing corporations, limited liability companies, and trusts. The corporate sequence flips. It earns revenue, spends on operations, and is taxed only on the net profit. Furthermore, this structure acts as a firewall. If a venture fails, the institution absorbs the bankruptcy, leaving personal assets untouched. The tax code is structurally asymmetrical. It rewards institutional risk-taking while leaving individual vulnerability fully exposed. To build these insulated systems, the wealthy rely on a tool the middle class is taught to fear: debt. That fear comes from consumer debt, where individuals borrow from their future to purchase depreciating liabilities like vehicles and vacations. But the unwritten curriculum utilizes production debt. This involves borrowing capital at a low interest rate to purchase a productive asset that yields a return higher than the cost of the loan. This illustrates the mechanics of leverage. An investor uses a small percentage of cash to control a massive asset. When the market appreciates, they capture that increase on the total property value, multiplying the return on their initial deposit. As those assets appreciate, a final structural advantage opens up. Instead of selling equity and triggering a capital gains tax, wealthy individuals borrow against their growing portfolio, accessing tax-free cash. The middle class works exhaustingly to pay off debt. The wealthy strategically deploy debt to ensure they never have to work for a paycheck again. These mechanics do not operate in a vacuum. The systems of leverage and ownership are frequently accelerated by a distinct head start. the transfer of intergenerational wealth. Demographic analyses of household wealth reveal a massive gap between the money a person can generate in a single lifetime and the capital passed down through families. This chart shows the composition of total household wealth. Life cycle savings, the money earned and saved by current workers, contributes roughly 34.5%. Inherited bequests, however, account for up to 40.5% of total accumulated wealth. What is being transferred goes beyond liquid cash. Beneficiaries inherit the unwritten curriculum itself, granting them the luxury of operating on a 30-year time horizon without the panic of living paycheck to paycheck. You cannot outwork a structural generational advantage with an hourly wage. Surviving the system requires actively adopting the mechanics of the wealthy. Yet possessing the blueprint for leverage and ownership is useless without the specific psychological discipline required to maintain it. Capitalism demands two entirely different skill sets. Getting money requires optimism, taking risks, and putting yourself out there. Keeping money demands the exact opposite. It requires frugality, humility, and a healthy dose of fear that what you have built can easily disappear. This is why the most successful long-term investors prioritize endurance. They structure their portfolios not to maximize short-term gains, but to simply stick around long enough for the math to work in their favor. It requires building massive room for error into your finances. Over a century ago, financier J.P. Morgan advised an anxious investor to simply sell down their positions until they reached a sleeping point, a level of security that prevents forced liquidations during chaotic crises. Relying on purely mathematical models to predict a highly volatile world is a trap. People evolve, economies crash, and strict, inflexible financial plans break under the weight of reality. Making decisions that are mostly reasonable works better than trying to be coldly rational. A reasonable strategy accounts for human emotion and error, making it much easier to sustain over the decades. Sheer intelligence does not guarantee wealth. Psychological survival and the endurance to stay in the game are what actually allow compounding interest the time it needs to perform. This leads to the final trap, confusing being rich with being wealthy. Being rich is a current income. It is loud, visible, and frequently spent on depreciating status symbols to project success to others. Wealth is entirely hidden. It is the luxury cars not purchased, the diamonds left in the store, and the first-class upgrades declined. It is the financial assets that have not been converted into visible stuff. Societal status is the quiet enemy of accumulation. Financing a lifestyle merely to impress strangers drains your capital and leaves you permanently tethered to the treadmill. Stepping off that treadmill requires discarding the outer scorecard of public validation. Instead, the wealthy operate on an inner compass, optimizing every financial decision for one specific outcome: absolute independence. True financial freedom does not begin with a promotion. It begins the moment you stop chasing a higher income just to buy status and start quietly acquiring ownership to buy back your time.